Welcome back to State of Decay 2 and the Commune. We got enough done in the last few episodes that I actually have a lot of options now. I could kind of do anything. My community is not in the same kind of dire straits we were in before. So I had a suggestion from one of my viewers. Cogs is suggesting that maybe I could go and get myself a backup vehicle, because right now I've only got the one vehicle. It'd be nice to have something with a larger carrying capacity, that sort of thing. So there is a Reims V up here. That is probably, I can get there on foot. I've got a character who actually I'd like to finish leveling up her cardio, so running her around would actually be pretty valuable. So yeah, I'm gonna maybe not go out this door, because this door has got a couple of screamers. Maybe I'll go out the other door. But yeah, so running around might actually be good, not only to up her cardio, but because it's a low impact thing that I can do while I answer some questions, because So I did a video a few episodes back about, do developers lie about the games they work on, and should you assume that I'm lying when I say things to the audience? And it was I don't know. I don't know if I did the best job of explaining all of my ideas in that. And actually, most people are generally, pretty understanding of the point that I was making, which is, I don't have like some huge motivation to lie. Like a lot of what I really like to do is be as transparent as I can with the audience. And a lot of people get that. I did get one comment from a viewer that was kind of interesting. I think, it was one of those very cynical answers where, I don't really agree with everything that the guy said. In fact, I think I disagree with nearly all of it. But that's okay. I'm not trying to undermine him too much. There's a lot of perspectives out there that people can take, and if somebody wants to read that comment back on the old video and see what this guy said, his name is Habination, what he says, go for it. I like having an open dialogue on my channel about things like this, but he, I disagree with a lot of what he said, and I think you can probably tell which things, but he did bring up a couple of interesting points that I wanted to address. So this is for you, Habination. But let me quickly state, like, arguments on the internet can usually go back and forth forever, and so don't get used to this. Like, the thing I don't want to do is sort of set an expectation that I'm going to be sort of like getting into back and forth arguments with random people in my comments, because that can actually start to get kind of pathetic when a content creator just like does nothing but argue with their audience all the time. And so I'm probably not gonna do that. Oh, hello. There's a screamer and everything. I think I can take that one screamer out at least. So basically, I'm just saying, if you don't like something I say in this video and you make a comment, don't expect that I'll necessarily come back and do another whole video answering you. At some point, I'm going to stop, engaging about this particular topic. But, when I was specifically saying, I don't understand... I was saying I don't understand why people assume that I'm lying when I give pretty reasonable explanations for things. When people say, why did this happen? And I say, here's the reason. Sometimes people will respond saying, oh, you're lying. And I'm like, what? Why would I lie? I just gave a reasonable explanation. There's no particular reason to think that story I told wouldn't be true. Like, why would you assume I would lie? So Habination brought up a couple of reasons to why somebody might assume that a company might lie. And so I wanted to talk through them, because I had a couple of reactions to that, and I was like, I should say something about this. So the first point that he raised was that, I don't know if this actually might not be the first one he raised. It's the first one I wrote down in my notes, was that companies are not there to be your friend. Companies are there to make money. Which means, therefore, if they act like they're being your friend and they act like they're being open and honest and things like that, really all they're doing is trying to get money from you. And so it's sort of all fake. Is sort of the insinuation there. And it raises an interesting point, because, companies in general, corporations, they are they're treated as people by the law. They're treated as individuals. But people often make the point that, if corporations are people, then corporations are sociopaths, which is a pretty fair point to make, because oh, there's a plague heart right here. I do kind of want to poke around in this post office before I get in the car. We're basically, corporations have got motivations. Like the reason that a corporation exists usually is because it has succeeded in making money. It's kind of like, if you observe a feature on an organism, usually you could say, oh, well, this feature must have survival value, because if it didn't have survival value, the creature would have died. Or like the creature's ancestors would have died. And so you can kind of look at a creature and say pretty much every feature of this creature must have survival value, because if it didn't, it wouldn't be here. And similarly, you know, with companies, typically a company isn't going to last very long if it didn't find a way to make money, which means you can kind of say that whatever a company does is probably to some degree or another motivated by the company's desire to make money. And that totally makes a lot of sense. And that is true. You know, companies exist to make money, or at least if they don't exist to make money, they're unlikely to survive unless they somehow find a way to make money alongside their other goals. There's a lot of thought out there about how, you know, if you actually start a company and the only thing you want to accomplish is making money, you'll probably fail, because unless you have some other thing you're striving for, just hungrily going after money and nothing else is going to actually undermine your ability to accomplish things that people actually care about, and sort of earn the trust and loyalty of customers and things like that. You have to have some reason why you're starting a company that isn't just, I want to have money. Wanting to make money is a qualification, but it can't be the reason. And so, but the point still stands. Yes, companies only survive if they make money, which means that companies are going to be motivated to make money. And if, you know, and that could motivate a company to lie about something if they think that there's money in it. And that, you know, and that is true. That is totally a fair point to make. The place where I would sort of counter it with another idea is the fact that a company is a distinct entity from the people that work for the company. And so while, you know, the company is like this meta-organism made out of a lot of people, it isn't any of those individual people. And so a lot of the time when you're on the internet talking to representatives of a company or talking to people who work for a company, you're not talking to the company. You're talking to the individuals. And so when you know, when you say things like, you only want to make money, you're lying to me to make money, that sort of thing, actually the person you're talking to probably does not have the same motivations that a corporation might have. You know, like, for example, I think a lot of the engineers that I work with could make more money if they went and worked for a social media company, or if they went and worked for a tech firm or something like that. A lot of those other companies outside the game industry will pay a lot more for a skilled and experienced engineer than the game industry is capable of paying. And so a lot of those engineers, if they're working in the game industry, it's specifically because, you know, they're not doing it for money. It's specifically because they want to make great video games, and they take a lot of pride in their work, and they're passionate about making, you know, as good of a game as they can. And so if you went to that individual and said, you're just terrible, you're only here to make money, it might be true of the company they work for, but that individual engineer is like, no, I can make way more money doing something else. I'm here because I want to make a great video game. And that's going to be true about pretty much every individual who works for a company. And so that's one of the reasons why my reaction is always like, when somebody says, you know, like, oh, you're just lying to make money, I'm like, you know, I totally agree that corporations, you know, have that as their motivation, but that's not like, I mean, now, making video games, designing video games is my only skill. This is actually probably the only way I can make money. I'm not an engineer. But that said, you know, the reason I got into video games instead of developing skills in other things was because I'm really passionate about video games. And, you know, the reason I work for Undead Labs instead of some other companies because I'm really passionate about this particular video game and its audience. And so, you know, if you sort of like try to tell me, oh, you're just lying to make money, I'm going to be like, you just don't understand me. It's like, it's not that, you know, it's not that I'm going to be able to persuade you. Like, if you're cynical about this sort of thing, that there's nothing I'm going to be able to say that's going to convince you that you're wrong about me or something. And so I'm not going to try. Like, I'm not going to sit here and belabor it for ages and try to convince you that no, I'm one of the good ones or whatever. You know, if you think everyone's a sociopath, then whatever, you're going to think everyone's a sociopath. But I'm just telling you, like, when you make that argument to me, all I'm thinking about isn't necessary. I don't think of myself as being the company and having, you know, larger corporate motivations. I think of myself as being this individual, this guy who works on video games. And I'm like, no, like, I really, really want to make a good video game. I really, really want to have a good relationship with our audience. I really, really want to, you know, be honest with the audience and transparent and stuff like that. So, like, when you tell me that I've got this nefarious motivation, I'm like, no, I don't. And so Yeah, so you see kind of where that's sort of like it's a weird hair to split because like I said, you can be absolutely right about the motivations of a corporation and be absolutely wrong about the motivation of every single individual inside that corporation. And when you're talking to the individuals, they're going to feel like you don't understand them if you treat them like they have the same motivations that a corporation would have. And also, I mean, even corporate motivations do get complicated. Like, for instance, Undead Labs is a first-party studio. We're owned by a larger company that makes a console and a service, with Game Pass. And so while, when we were an independent company, we had to think a lot about like profitability, and we had to make choices that you sort of led to us to be able to sell things. Like, a lot of the early choices that you can see in like the DLC that we offered for State of Decay 2, you can kind of tell that it was motivated by the fact that, this studio needs to be able to sell something. It needs to be able to make money. But when we were bought by Microsoft, that got more complicated. Now, Microsoft as a company does need to make money, but there's lots of different ways that Microsoft can make money. And some of them are directly profiting from a video game, or profiting from selling a console, or profiting from something else. But not every subsidiary of the company needs to be focused specifically on directly making money. There's lots of things that Microsoft subsidiaries could do that contribute to the overall profitability of the company that's not directly saying, I need to make money right now. First-party studios can make a game that doesn't make money, but that brings in critical acclaim, or that is it serves a niche audience, then brings that niche audience into Game Pass, or can improve the reputation of the company, or it's like maybe the game was really expensive and it does well, but the thing that makes it valuable isn't selling copies of the game; it's people buying the console so that they can play that game. And so even then, talking about the motivations of a company like Undead Labs, our motivations are more complicated than just, even at the corporate level, our motivations are more complicated than just making money. Because there's just so many other things we can do that are valuable to our parent company that are not making money. And in this case, we are supporting State of Decay 2 with free updates all the time, not because the updates themselves make money, but because the updates, they add to the value of Game Pass, and they add to the reputation of Microsoft, and they do a lot of things that are good for the company. They're not directly, this game made some money. And so it's great too, because if you are an individual who's got, motivations that are fairly noble, that's like, yeah, I just want to make a really great video game and have people play it and have them like it. If that's your motivation as an individual, which it is for, basically all of my colleagues, then working at a company like this that is doing a project like this, where we're providing these updates for free to an audience that already owns the game or has already decided to pay for Game Pass. Like, that's a perfect scenario for us, because it really does align our motivations with the corporate motivations. It means that we're not having to constantly like hold our nose and do what the company wants to keep the company afloat, so that we can also do what we want, which is to make a great video game. Really, our only job right now is to make a great video game and do it, for no additional charge, because it's good for the parent company for it to work that way. So we get to have like the most noble motivations I've ever gotten to have in my entire career, because of the situation we're in. So anyway, so that's sort of my reaction to that assertion that, yeah, like companies only want to make money and therefore you can't trust companies. It's true to a degree, but it's also really not super true for a lot of the individuals that work there. Okay, let me catch up with the chat real quick. And say, okay, so La Coalición is actually saying a lot of, like, he's using some, yeah, talking about, they teach him, he's an economics student. He's teaching, he's being taught about things like conscient capitalism and, what was the other term you used? Egotistical altruism at business school. That basically, there is room for companies to be altruistic. And the thing that's tough is, it is possible for individuals to set up a company with the intent of it being altruistic. And a lot of people do succeed, sometimes for long periods of time, with a company doing altruistic things. And actually, I really, if we're going to be owned by a large company, I mean, Microsoft has done a really good job of part of how they attract some of the best engineers and other, employees is they make a big deal about doing things ethically. Because, and again, on a corporate level, there's not a lot of motivation to be altruistic, except because a lot of the talent they want to attract does care about a company being altruistic. The company can selfishly decide to be altruistic in order to attract that talent, which is kind of the strategy that I think Microsoft has adopted. They go over the top, really trying to like ram home to us all the time how altruistic they're being, how important it is to be ethical, because they think that, you know, accurately, that a lot of the people who work for Microsoft really want that to be the case. And so it's been a good company to work for a lot of those reasons. By the way, I should figure out another reason for me to run out there. You know what? We got a couple of bloaters over here, and actually, I've got a bounty. Let me drop this and actually drop off a lot of the other stuff that I've been picking up, because I've got a bounty that is all about hitting bloaters with pistols, and so I should get rid of that and run out there with a pistol and take out some of these bloaters. Anyway, yeah, so anyway, company motivations are complicated. Yes, it's totally fair to be cynical about corporations existing to make money and therefore assume they're always going after money. But at the same time, it does get more complex than that, especially when you're talking to individuals. Now, that was just one topic. There was a second topic that Habination brought up that I kind of wanted to address too. And he basically implied, I don't remember what his actual language was, but he basically implied that that one reason you might a game developer might lie about what's going on is to protect their colleagues from looking incompetent. And basically, like, oh, if there's like rampant incompetence at the studio, you might lie about what's going on in order to shield people from responsibility for their actions or something like that. And that's an interesting one because he frames it in this really negative way. Like there's some, brewing scandal at a company about how incompetent the people are and that would lie to cover our butts to cover how incompetent we are. And that's a really negative way to phrase something that I think of in a much more positive way, which is that, being somebody who works in a creative profession, making mistakes is a massive part of the process. Like, there are people who are good at this job and people who are bad at this job and everything in between. But no one is perfect at this job. And there's no such thing as a perfect creative person who does their job absolutely perfectly at all times. The part of doing anything creative is making a bunch of mistakes along the way. And so when you frame it like, oh, you're trying to hide your incompetence, I'm like, no, you could frame it that way, but only if you want to say that, like, literally everybody is incompetent and everyone's scared, which, I don't know, maybe you could phrase it that way if you want to. But no, like, for me, the way that I think about it is that because the process of building something creative is intrinsically filled with mistakes, because there's also people in the audience who view every mistake as being some kind of scandal, something that's worthy of derision, or sometimes even, heaping abuse on people for the mistakes that they make. If we actually, went out there and sort of publicized every single mistake that we made, and like made some huge deal out of it, and we're like really transparent about all the details of all the mistakes we made, what we would be doing would be inviting people to just heap abuse on our colleagues. When actually, what I want to create is not a scenario at this company where everyone has to be terrified to make a mistake, because if they make a mistake, the audience is going to find out about it, and the worst people on the internet are going to come in and just heap abuse on them and throw death threats at them and all of the terrible things that happen to you when people find out you did something wrong, and they're angry about it. If we actually created an environment like that, where all of our mistakes were public and everything sort of opened you up to internet abuse, that would be a terrible place to work. No one would want to work here, and they would be correct. Those are not conditions under which people should be trying to do creative work. A situation where every mistake gets you punished. I just forgot what I was doing. I was going at her to fight a bloater. Instead, I just went and I got some meds instead. I mean, that's good. I'll need the meds if the bloater does anything to me. But I should stay on task. Anyway, that'll be a terrible place to work. And so, like, a big part of, like, the job that I do as, like, one of the public-facing, faces of the company is that I'm like a lightning rod for everybody else. You know, my job is to be the person who goes out there and answers questions and gives sort of, you know, like honest but not extremely detailed and specific explanations for the choices that we make. Because, you know, we need to create an environment where my colleagues are allowed to try things and make mistakes. You know, and you know, if we can successfully create an environment where people feel not afraid to make mistakes, and they feel like they're allowed to try new things that they're not quite sure are going to work, and if they, oh, I forgot to drop off my stuff, and then if they find out that something didn't work, it's okay, because the audience doesn't know what they did. The audience doesn't know that they tried this weird thing, it didn't work, and then they had to try something else. They don't have to answer to anyone for that. They get to answer to people who are like them, who understand how the process works, realizes, oh yeah, I totally understand what you were going for. It didn't quite work out, but it's fine. You know, go and try the next thing, learn from the mistake, and let's keep going. You know, that's the environment you want to create for creative people to work in. And so, I mean, so yeah, I guess you could frame the job that I do as like, you know, one of the faces of the company as being, you know, like hiding the truth so that people can make mistakes and not answer for them. I'm like, yes, like that is necessary. That is a huge part of trying to make a successful creative enterprise is creating a space where people are free to make mistakes and not be punished. And there are definitely lots of companies out there where people get punished for their mistakes, where if you do something that doesn't work, you have an idea that doesn't work, within the even without talking to the audience, there's places where within the company you will be brutally mocked, you'll be made fun of. I've had, you know, design directors whose strategy, not at Undead Labs, at like previous places I worked, whose strategy when somebody did something that didn't work out was to laugh at them and mock them and embarrass them. And I don't work at those places anymore because that's a bad experience. And that's not a place like, you know what, I am going to make mistakes. I've made lots of mistakes that I've acknowledged, you know, with State of Decay 2, things that I still hope we can fix at some point in the future. And because that's part of the process. You do your best when you're trying to make something new, you're going to screw it up in a lot of ways. And you do your best to make the best possible version of it by the time you have to ship. But there are mistakes involved. There are always mistakes involved. And if I worked at a place where every time I made a mistake, I was subject to some kind of cruelty, I couldn't possibly function in an environment like that. And or if I did have to function in an environment like that, I would only make the most conservative, safest creative choices I could possibly make in order to save myself from the pain of trying to go through that kind of ridicule. So, I mean, so there's another case where it's like, yeah, I guess if you want to frame it that way, you know, you could say that, oh yeah, you're lying to hide your incompetence, but like, that's a good thing about a company. Like, not, you know, if you frame it like it's lying, like, you know, whatever. Like, I don't go out there and tell like false stories about what happened. You know, when something goes on, usually I'll just tell vague stories. I won't try to like subject someone to you know, to feeling bad about a particular thing. Like, you know, like this past delay of the, we didn't take Forever Communities to the PTR in May the way that we thought we were going to. And when I offered my explanation, the thing that somebody said that they thought was a lie, when I offered my explanation was, we encountered some bugs in the live game that took priority. And so we stopped working on getting Forever Communities ready for the PTR, and we started solving those bugs instead because the bugs were a huge emergency. But you know what bugs are? They're mistakes. Like, someone made a mistake, and that's why there are bugs that we had to go and solve. I don't know who made the mistake, and I also don't care because everyone makes mistakes. I've made tons and tons and tons of mistakes while working at this game. Some of them we found before they shipped, and the audience didn't have to deal with it. But many of the mistakes that I made went out to the game. I designed a terrible system of Red Talon characters. It's terrible because they're OP, and people, and I anchored players' expectations really, really high for like what Red Talon soldiers were able to do. And eventually we had to rebalance them in order for the game to make any sense. And then people were angry that we rebalanced them, that we nerfed the Red Talon soldiers. And that entire fiasco was a mistake that I made. And I talked about it publicly, like, this is a mistake that I made. But if it had been a mistake somebody else made, I wasn't going to like frame it that way. I'm not going to be like, oh yeah, some jerk that I worked with made some big mistake. Oh, don't we all, you know, look down on that person for their mistakes. I would be a terrible colleague if that's how I frame stuff. So like, yeah, so when a mistake is mine, I will happily go out there and tell everyone about the mistake I made and own up to it. And as a company, we often acknowledge mistakes we made. Like, we'll say, yes, a bug got into the game. We're so sorry. We needed to take the time to fix it, and that delayed other things we were doing. We'll admit to our mistakes, but not in a way that exposes my colleagues to like specific colleagues to like abuse on the internet. If that's the kind of transparency you're looking for, if it's not enough for you for me to say, we found a bug in the live game, we had to drop everything to fix it, and that delayed the other work that we thought we were going to get done in that time, I'm so sorry. If I say that and that's not good enough for you, like you need me to tell you more information, give you more details about who made the mistake and why and exactly what happened, I'm like, yeah, I know, I'm sorry. I'm going to leave that information out. Like, there's lying, like telling a false story about what happened, but then there's just privacy. There's like, giving people the freedom to make mistakes, not subjecting my colleagues to criticism and ridicule and like excessive amounts of scrutiny. That's just being a good friend, and that's just, like trying to create a healthy work environment. That's not a problem that I think I need to fix. So anyway, so that's what I wanted to share about that. And so this is one of those cases where it's like both of those answers, both of those questions kind of come down to, yes, absolutely, you can think of reasons why people might lie, and if you want to frame them in the most like cynical and pejorative way possible, you totally can do that. And it's not like I'm going to go and delete your comment or something. People can read that and people can agree with you if they want to, and that's totally fine. But I just wanted to give you sort of my take on that, where I'm like, if you actually had the world you're looking for, where where people were so transparent that they gave you the actual outrage porn that you're looking for, like you want to be really angry at somebody for making a mistake, yeah, I don't want to give you that, and I think that's fine. I feel comfortable in the moral and ethical choice I'm making by not exposing my colleagues to a lot of anger and scrutiny. Oh, so the Coalition is reminding me that this fight that I'm getting into might involve a Juggernaut at some point, so I should switch to my character who's got a heavy weapon. So if I end up fighting a Juggernaut, I can win that bounty that I've got on my screen. That's a very good point. Thank you, Coalition, for reminding me of that. Now, I think this might actually be a pretty light siege. I didn't have a lot going on in my... yeah, it's a pretty light siege. I didn't have a lot going on in my base. Threat level was low, so we got a really, really light siege. Which is fine. I've also got a bunch of influence now, which is good. Actually, I think I might have enough influence now to upgrade my food outpost. Do I? No, because I don't have enough materials. I've got enough influence. I don't have enough materials. So we're not going to do that right now. But I think this might actually be a fairly good time to go after that Juggernaut. And at some point, we should actually go out and find a place to get materials. I can get materials right there. That's a good spot for materials. There's a Juggernaut here. There's materials right there. That's probably a good plan for the next episode. Now, I think I've let the chat just absolutely languish while I was going off on that rant. So let me scroll back a little bit. See what folks said. So I'll wrap up this episode by looking at the chat and see if there's anything here that that I want to read. So okay, so Gaming with Chris brings up the fact that that he would be very upset if their legacy pool was wiped, which was the bug we were talking about. Like we found some bugs where if you did a couple of there was one common thing that players could do that would lose them a couple of legacy characters, and there was one very rare thing a player could do that would lose them all of their legacy characters. And that actually kind of illustrates the different kinds of bugs that are out there. There's some bugs that are common and light, and some bugs that are rare but really bad. Those are kind of equal in priority, because a lot of people experiencing a minor problem is a big deal, and very few people experiencing a major problem, also a big deal. So both of those bugs needed to be solved. And yeah, so Gaming with Chris, I think that the team, I'm not on the team anymore, so I wasn't there for the deliberations, but it seems like the team made absolutely the right choice, stopping everything to solve those bugs, and before moving on. Because people experiencing that, getting their legacy pool wiped, that's a really bad experience, and we have to solve that as quickly as we can. So Awesome Twitch Dude said, the original OG Red Talon were amazing, and it wasn't a mistake. So that's the thing. That's a difficult thing for game designers to deal with, because there's a lot of cases where if you asked players, should I do it this way, they will say yes, because if you're giving players a lot of power or a lot of freedom, a lot of the time, even if you see that there are downsides to that, if there are ways that the game gets subtly worse if you do it that way, I've been having lots of conversations about things like this since I'm working on an unreleased game. A lot of times we have to imagine how players are going to react to things and sort of make decisions around that. And a lot of what you have to do is sometimes you will imagine, what will the players think if I give them this? A lot of times you'll think they will love this, and they will say, yes, please give me this. And if you ask them and if you poll them, do you want this? They will all say yes. And sometimes you have to still decide not to do it. Because even though someone says, yes, I want this, they might not realize that actually I'm breaking the game, and their enjoyment of the game will subtly get worse. And so even though they think they were given what they wanted, they end up not playing the game anymore because it got boring or weird, or they just don't really enjoy it anymore. They're not sure why. And it's because I gave them what they wanted. And instead, if I gave them a slightly different thing that wasn't exactly the thing they would have said they wanted, but solves those problems, they'll end up actually really liking the game more. Maybe they'll keep raising their hand and asking for the thing that they want, but they'll actually enjoy the game more and play the game for longer and be more invested in it because we made the more difficult trade-offy decision. And I think that's like with the Red Talon people, absolutely. I know that people want super powered Red Talon characters with no downsides. Totally get that. I still think it was a mistake. And for one thing, a lot of those people, when I gave them all of these really super powerful Red Talon characters, those became the only characters they ever played, and they basically started ignoring all the other characters in the game, and the texture of the game suffered for it. And they started, like, you would run into a character who had anything wrong with them, and they would just immediately reject the character. And a lot of the sort of the creative and sort of narrative experiences that we wanted to create with the game were kind of being undermined by the fact that mechanically the game was telling you this is the only good person in the apocalypse, and that's not what we wanted to do, and that's not what I think a lot of players actually would sort of benefit from getting out of the experience. Not to mention, just putting anything that's OP in a game can unbalance it and just make everything in the game weird in subtle ways. So I still count that as a mistake. If anything, I should have started with them underpowered, and if people didn't like how underpowered they were, then I could have raised the power and everybody would have been really happy with them. Instead, I went the other way. I made the mistake of overpowering them at first, and then I had to pull back, and nobody likes that experience. So thing is, pulling them back, I think it was the right call. I also understand it's a bad experience, but when I blame myself for that bad experience, I don't blame myself for deciding to tune them back. That was a good decision. Even though people didn't like the fact that I tuned them back, the point where I made the bad decision wasn't when I tuned them back. The point when I made the bad decision was when I made them OP in the first place and anchored people's expectations that Red Talon characters should be perfect. That was the mistake that I made. If I had anchored your expectations so Red Talon people were flawed individuals like everybody else in the apocalypse, but had some cool advantages that made people like them, that would have been great. I think nobody would have even felt the lack of having super-powered, perfect Red Talon characters. They would have been like, hey, Red Talon characters are neat and I like them. And that would have been it, and if I had made them, a little too underpowered, I could have bumped them up a little bit and people would have been just thrilled, and that would have been a good choice. And so that's the lesson that I learned from that experience. That was more ranting on that particular thing than I should have done. Wizard asks, what was the reasons behind the primary care nerf? I don't know, because I actually don't know what you're talking about. So I'm sorry I can't give you a detailed answer on that. Because, yeah, either I knew about it at the time we did it and I've forgotten because I moved off the team, or depending on what you're talking about and when it was introduced, it might have happened after I left the team and I genuinely never knew about it. So I'm sorry I can't give you details on that one. I don't know a lot about it. Oh yeah, so look, Coalition has got some very specific suggestions about, like, for instance, logistics as a skill needing to be improved. So yeah, so I've listened to you about this stuff before, and I have taken it under advisement. Though now I'm not actually the best person to give those that advice to, because I'm not on the team anymore. So Scott Lannon says, everyone makes mistakes, and as long as we learn from them, that's all that matters. You guys are very open as possible, and I love that about this team. Actually, there's... thank you for saying that, Scott. I really appreciate it. It makes me feel good. And it also makes me realize there's one other point that I should make, which is, folks like Habination, who, he made a very cynical comment that when I read it, I was like, ugh, kind of made me feel bad inside and stuff. That's fine. Like, Habination was the only person who, at least so far, who's made a comment like that on that video. It's not like I had a flood of comments like that. And people here and there disagreeing with me, even if, the way they disagree with me kind of makes me feel like crap a little bit. It's not, if it's just a handful of people, that's fine. We can roll with that. It's okay if you criticize us. Like, it's totally okay. And I don't bear any ill will towards Habination in particular. It's like, he's got an opinion. He shared it in my comments. It's fine. Opinions are welcome in my comments. That's totally cool. But you should think about it a little bit when you're thinking of making negative comments like that, because if you're just isolated, it's fine. But, sometimes when developers get in trouble with their audience, it can get really, really bad. Sometimes it is floods of comments. Sometimes it gets as bad as death threats being sent to specific developers and things like that, which is a terrible experience, right? And so when you're, thinking of how you're going to react publicly to news from a game developer, do think about the fact that, like, for instance, with this particular situation that we got into where we announced a public roadmap, then ran into a problem, then had to delay things, past the dates that we said. That was, kind of embarrassing for us. We don't like, saying one thing and then finding out we have to then do another. That's awkward and, uncomfortable for everyone. But the thing that was great was most of our audience was really, really supportive. We got a negative comment here and there, but most people were really supportive of it, which is great because we're like, okay, cool. That makes us regret being, like, because we were trying to be transparent up front, and that, like, and we don't have to regret it very much because people were largely nice. Here and there were negative comments, and when those negative comments happen, we're like, oh, that hurts. Maybe we shouldn't try to do a roadmap next time, because when we do and things go wrong, then we get criticized, and that's not fun. And so when you're thinking about, criticizing something, a move like that, just think about sort of the tone that you use, and also, pay attention to, like, how many people are piling on, because if you pile on too hard when developers do their best to admit mistakes, or when they sort of, like, try to, when they end up needing to do things like delay something, what you end up doing is making them very hesitant about being transparent in the first place. The thing that, when people, one of the comments that Habination made, for instance, was that, delays aren't going to cut it. Like, if you're trying to, make a popular game with updates, and if we'd ever decided to do something like a season pass, which we haven't done, but, if you try to sell things like season passes, you can't delay things, and it's not going to cut it. And when I read that, the thing that was kind of funny to me was, like, the only reason this felt like a delay was because we said a date up front. The thing you don't realize is that literally everything that is ever done in game development is delayed. The question isn't whether something is delayed. The question is whether we told you about a date before we delayed it. Like, games that come out on time, I guarantee you 97% of the games that came out on time actually had a different release date planned originally, and they got delayed. The difference was they didn't tell you when they were going to come out until after they had done their last delay. But literally everything does get delayed. Nothing gets finished when we think it's going to get finished, with very few exceptions. And so when you attack people for delaying something and say, oh, I can't tolerate delays, what you're telling them is they should never tell you a date in advance. You're telling them that, because we know internally as a game developer, everything gets delayed. Nothing follows the schedule you think it's going to follow when you first plan it at the very outset. And so you're telling us when you say you can't tolerate delays, what that means is we should not give you release dates. We should just wait till something's done, tell you when it's done, and then release it when it's done, because then it can never be delayed. So you're creating like a weird incentive for us. Like, when you get really, really angry about delays, what you're telling us is that we shouldn't be transparent, and we shouldn't tell you what we think is going to happen, and we shouldn't issue roadmaps. Because that's because that's where delays come from. We're not going to be able to prevent things from taking longer than we expect. That will happen every time. The only thing we can do is communicate with you less. But luckily, we actually got, as far as I'm aware, we got very few negative comments about that delay. People were very understanding, especially because we did tell you the reason for it, and we were very transparent about it. And a lot of people did really appreciate that and sent us positive comments about that, which made us feel good. And so I don't think you've actually disincentivized us as a whole, as a community, from trying to be transparent and trying to tell you as much as we can, which is good, but when you are, thinking like, oh, this delay happened and I'm frustrated, and so I'm going to punish the developer for delaying it, all you're doing is punishing them for talking to you. That's all you're going to do. They're not going to be able to stop delays from happening. Delays will happen. The only thing that you can punish them enough that they'll do is stop talking to you. So there you go. Yeah, so Lacolucian says, you can't tolerate delays. Well, can you tolerate bugs? Because that's, those are the alternatives. When something might be delayed, when something is taking longer than it expected, there are a couple of different ways to handle it. One is to delay it, is to actually do a delay. Another solution is to ship the version that is broken. You can always do that. Like, you could ship something on time with a bunch of bugs in it. People don't appreciate that either. Another thing that you can do is crunch really hard and work all of your developers to death. That can sometimes get one thing out on time that should have taken longer. But the problem is, if you keep doing that, everyone gets worse at their jobs. Like, that's not a thing you can just do like, oh yeah, everybody just work harder and then it'll stop being such lazy developers. Work harder and get this stuff done on time and perfect for us. That's actually, like, literally not possible. It's like asking, 9 women to have gestate a baby in 1 month. You can't do that. Things take time, and if you try to accelerate it too much and, like, try to force something to happen in a time frame that isn't actually feasible, sometimes you can get it done, sort of, in time. But what you do is you work people into the ground. And then they're non-functional, and then they start making more mistakes, and they start, and they start, just being incapable of you run out of energy and you're incapable of doing much more. And it ultimately hurts you and the game in the long run. The company the company starts bleeding people. You have a lot of turnover because the people just can't tolerate those work conditions anymore. And then you have to train new people up, and they will make more mistakes because they're new. And, not because there's anything wrong with them, but because, you're always making mistakes when you're new at something. There isn't a version of this, like, when you find out that a particular thing that you're trying to do is going to take longer than you thought, there isn't a good solution. Either you delay, or you ship a crappy version, or you work people to death, and all of those have downsides. And so I think delay is actually the healthiest solution in that case. You don't work people to death, which means that they will stay with you. You'll have a lot of people who have a lot of expertise in your game continuing to work on it, on all the future updates, rather than leaving and needing to be replaced by new people, or just being run into the ground and just being miserable, for the rest of their, tenure working on the game. And you don't end up shipping a garbage version of the game that everyone hates. Delays are actually not that bad, in the grand scheme of things, considering all of the alternatives that you have when things go wrong. Delays are pretty good. I love the fact that, the State of Decay 2 team is in a situation where they're issuing free updates. They're free, which means that there's just a lot of leeway to just, to delay things when you need to delay them, because nobody pre-purchased it. Nobody, there isn't, it's just, everything they're doing is gravy on top of the game people have already bought. And so they get to delay stuff, which is that was, working on the State of Decay 2 team was one of the healthiest periods of my entire career, the post-release State of Decay 2 team, because they were so, basically just willing to do what it took to not work people to death, but still make really good choices about the game and issue, updates that were as healthy and good as anything I've ever done in my career in the industry. Now and then, the times that were the hardest were the times when we actually did have a date we couldn't miss. Things like with a huge marketing push around it, like the Juggernaut edition or the Homecoming update. Those were a bigger deal, and they were probably the hardest time I had in the post-release State of Decay 2 team was working on the Homecoming update, because I had to, I was doing the final polish on all of the missions, and we were up against a release date that was very difficult to move because we had a whole marketing thing around it. And that was a rough time, and I was really relieved when when that was done, because we got to go back to the mode where we actually got to take our time and figure out how long something would take to get done, and then take that time on it. Anyway, Steve0143 says, "You're doing a great job, mate." Thank you, Steve0143. I really appreciate it. Scott Landon says, "You can't win with some people. If you delay, you're bad, but if you release it and there was a game-breaking bug, you're bad. Either way, someone will be hurt." Yeah, exactly. And so, and honestly, like, there are people who complain a lot about delays, but it's not everyone. And I think most people... one thing I really appreciate, actually, about modern players is that so many of them understand the idea that delays make a game better. That, it's disappointing if you're not going to get a game at the time that you wanted or that you expected it. And disappointing feelings are hard. But everyone sort of like accepts that idea, or in general, most people accept that idea that sort of that quote, was it a Miyamoto quote that was like, that a delayed game eventually comes out, but a broken game is broken forever. That was during an era where patches were impossible. But still, it's like that whole idea that like, yeah, like eventually you're gonna get a better version of the game if you accept a delay. And like, whenever somebody else, when I'm looking forward to a game and some other developer delays it, I'm always thrilled. I'm like, oh, good, you delayed the game. That means it's going to be better than it was going to be otherwise. And I'm really happy to hear that. I've never heard about a game delay and felt bad. I've always, at least since I became a game developer, whenever I hear about a game delay, I'm like, wow, that is awesome. I'm so glad that those people get to spend more time making this game better. It just makes me feel good. Halloran says, "I think the lessons learned from games like Cyberpunk have helped encourage people to feel better about delays." And while I'm not going to make any comments specifically about Cyberpunk, that's a good point. They basically, people do get to see the difference between a game that's released on time or as soon as people want it to be and has a lot of problems versus a game that really gets to spend its time getting it right. People see that difference. I think people, are getting more experienced with that, and they're sort of learning how that works. Oh, and some folks, R. Mello just subscribed. I appreciate that, R. Mello. Thank you so much. Oh, and so did Spec Up 308. Thank you, folks, for subscribing to my Twitch channel. I appreciate that. And let me see here. Oh, I've been talking for like nearly 45 or 50 minutes. Okay, I should wrap this video up. Let's do that. So there's a subscribe button. I am going to keep playing. I've got an agenda, so let's have that video go right here and some other nonsense right here.